When you finally get the time to ride, the last thing that you want is to be dealing with a noisy and unreliable bike. In this video, I'll show you my ultimate pre-ride checklist, perfect for keeping your bike in great working order without taking loads of time to complete. So let's dive in. Today we'll be completing this checklist on my girlfriend's bike, which as you can probably tell has been sat for some while and definitely needs looking over before we hit the trails. Now this first step is completely optional, but I always think it's nice to give a bike a quick wash and rinse before you actually start to get hands on and start working with the bike. It's also a lot easier to see stuff if you've got all the dust and debris removed and it doesn't get all over your hands. So as you can see here, I'm literally just giving it a very quick bucket and sponge wash. It's not aiming to detail the bike or get it completely spotless, it's just very quick, just get all the debris and the dust off it. So that's looking a lot better now. As you can see, I'm just leaving it outside to dry before I take it back inside to start working on it. If you've got one of these bike stands, I highly recommend them. You can sometimes pick them up nice and cheap, but it makes working on the bike so much easier. The first thing that I'm going to do is give the frame a very quick visual inspection to make sure there's no signs of any cracks, dents, rust, corrosion, that sort of thing that potentially could be a problem in future. Exactly what you're looking for will depend slightly on the material that your frame's made out of, but anything that potentially could be concerning, you should definitely go and have looked at by a professional mechanic to make sure it's not going to be a problem. Next, I'm just going to do a quick check of all the key bolts and fasteners around the bike, just tighten anything that's potentially come loose. If you've got a torque wrench, then obviously now's a great time to use it. Next, going to be checking the wheels and tyres, so starting with the tyre pressure, as you can see here, it's way too low. Doesn't necessarily mean there's a puncture, but as they've been sat for quite a while, the air can slowly leak out and escape, so it just needs to be topped up. The maximum pressure that you can pump it up to is usually on the sidewall of the tyre, but it will largely depend on stuff like your weight and the type of terrain that you ride. Next, you can inspect the tyre itself to make sure that it's not rotted or cracked at all, and have a look at the tread as well, make sure you've got enough tread on there. As you can see, I'm running pretty low on my own personal bike there, need to probably change those. Have a look at the sidewall, make sure there's no thorns, nails, that sort of thing that potentially could cause you a problem in future. Next, we'll rotate the tyre around and just make sure that it's not deformed or bulged in any particular places as it's been sat for a while. While the tyre's rotating, you can also check to see how true the wheel is. As you can see, there's a little bit of a wobble here. Now that could be the tyre, or it could be the actual wheel and the rim itself. To see if it's the rim itself, you can put something slowly up against the rim as the tyre is turning. As you can see here, I'm using my thumb. Now that is not advised and I recommend you don't copy me. You could easily get that trapped in the spokes. But essentially what you're looking for is to see if it scrapes periodically against your thumb. In this case, it is the rim a bit out of true, so I just need to tighten some of the spokes. Speaking of the spokes, the next thing I'm going to do is just to go around the wheel and just very gently, two at a time, just pinch the spokes together and just make sure none are either broken or are particularly loose compared to the other ones. I'll also go around the rim and just make sure there's no cracks or any dents that potentially could be catastrophic in future. Next up, we're going to have a look at the drivetrain. So as you can see, this one isn't particularly bad, but there's a little bit of gunk build-up, there's a little bit of corrosion. So what we're going to do is use the chain cleaner first of all. This is a really good tool if you haven't got one already. And then I'm going to take a brush and just brush away any gunk, use a bit of degreaser just to get any build-up off of the drivetrain. And then just using a rag, just dry it, get any dirty oil off, that sort of thing. Get it nice and dry. Then I'm going to apply a little bit of lube to the chain and the pulleys as well. This is a dry rated one because it's very unlikely my girlfriend's going to ride in the wet. And as you can see, that's come up quite nicely for a relatively minimal amount of work. We're then going to get the bike in the work stand and go through the gears. In this case, the gears weren't shifting particularly very well. They were quite noisy. There was quite a lot of skipping and getting stuck. So it just needed a little bit of a tune-up. All I had to do was just tighten the cable slightly using the barrel adjuster there, and that got the gears shifting a lot better. Essentially, the cable over time will stretch and it just needs to be adjusted so that the gears remain in sync. Now if that doesn't work, you might have to manually reset the cable. There's some videos online that show you how to do this, and that usually gets the cable tension into the right spot. You can also play around with the limit screws and such and just make sure that your derailleur hanger is not bent either. While I've got the tool out, I'm just going to check the chain to make sure that it's not worn. It's not done many miles, so I think it's actually fine. As you can see here, the chain tool doesn't fall into the slot, so that tells me that it's not worn at all. Next, we're going to have a look at the disc brakes, make sure that there's no residue on there that could potentially be affecting braking or any grooves. You can do the same on rim brake bikes as well. Then we'll have a look at the pads, make sure there's no abnormal wear on the pads. As you can see, it's quite easy to do for rim brake. For disc brakes, it's often best just to simply remove them from the caliper to have a good look at them. Really, I'm just looking here to make sure that there is actually some braking surface left, and any braking surface that is left isn't particularly glazed over or contaminated with any sort of residue. Once those pads and discs are back in, we're going to test the brake lever to make sure that it's not immediately hard or too squishy, as it could indicate that you need to either bleed the hydraulics, or if it's a cable disc brake, you need to adjust that cable and the opposing side as well. We'll then check the disc rotor itself to make sure that it's not warped or bent in any way. Then once you're happy, you can get out on some flat ground and just test that they actually stop you properly. And if they squeak like this, that could indicate that your disc brake's contaminated, but I do have a video which shows you how to decontaminate them. Next we're going to move on to the suspension, so we're going to give it some good compression, just make sure it feels nice and smooth and that there's not an excessive amount of oil coming from those seals, which could indicate that you're ready for a fork service. It's worth giving this a clean every now and again, make sure that you don't scour those stanchions. And if you've got air suspension, it's always good just to make sure that the pressure is set correctly. And of course all of this goes for rear air suspension as well. Next, moving on to the cockpit, we're going to check the headset bearing to make sure that it moves nice and freely, there's no grittiness or binding, but also that it doesn't feel loose when you rattle it back and forth either. Once I'm happy that the headset tension is set correctly and that the handlebars are straight, I'm going to tighten up these bolts and make sure that that's on nice and snug. Then just making sure the pedals spin freely, these don't. Also just making sure that they don't creak or rattle as I'm moving them back and forth with a bit of force. Then just going to take the chain off and spin the cranks, make sure that they spin freely, again looking for all the same things which could indicate that the bottom bracket is worn out and needs replacement. Then I like to get the bike off the work stand and just give it a final once over. Just move it about a bit, rattle it around, bounce it on the wheels, that sort of thing. Just make sure that everything feels solid, feels like it's been installed correctly. Obviously better to find that out now than when you're hurtling down the road. And actually when I did this for my own personal mountain bike, I found that the wheel bearings were starting to get a little bit loose. So it's a good time for me to get in there and tighten up those bearings before they actually get worn out. Then I like to just test the accessories on the bike. So make sure things like bottle cages are installed properly, that lights work if they're on there. Here I'm trying to test the dropper post, but it doesn't actually work, so I need to look into that. So just make sure things like the saddle's on properly, it's level, it's tightened. Make sure that the handlebar grips aren't worn out and that the handlebar ends are installed as well. So really just a once over of the bike, just making sure that everything is how it should be. Please give the video a thumbs up if that has been helpful to you and subscribe for more mountain biking content.